That joke isn't funny anymore. Available on Amazon and everywhere. Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and I am joined by Joe Terwilliger. Joe is an academic, a scientist, a tuba player, a man who speaks many languages, and I'm gonna throw his name out there as the most interesting man in the world. And he's an onion, folks. The more you keep peeling, the more interesting he gets. And yeah, exactly. There's a lot of sorrow in some of those layers. But Joe, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast.
It's my pleasure, Lou.
Awesome. So, Joe, I think I've met you through events with the Libertarian Party of New York. Like, I think I've performed a number of times live with you in the audience. I think you've probably seen my act quite a bit. I should probably get around to writing some new shit to perform in front of you. And one of the recent memories I have is there was an event up in Syracuse, New York, and I was up there. I was doing stand up. I think I was doing like an hour of stand up. And one of the bits that I've been doing is in regards to the tuba, and the conceit that I have, not to give the jokes away, is that nobody's ever made love to a tuba player. Like it's a sad instrument, and blah blah blah. And I went down that road, and then Joe, being not only a libertarian, which means that he's ready to argue, he's also a tuba player. So he had to correct the record from the audience and let me know that no, actually, tuba players, they can get some. And I think the reason that you gave was because of the lip action. You get that?
Well,
yeah. Look at that. For those of you who can't see that, I think the sound effects are there for sure. So why don't we just start there, because I don't meet many tuba players. Did you start playing as a kid, or is that something you took on later in life?
Yeah, I started as a kid, and I was pretty good at it, and that's all I wanted to do in high school. So I actually got my undergrad. I went to conservatory and studied music. So I got my bachelor's in tuba from Peabody Conservatory, and hoped I could make a career of it. And that was when I realized that, I like to eat. So, I couldn't do both. So I went to New York to study genetics because they actually pay you to go to school. I couldn't believe that was the ultimate scam. I thought I was going to go to graduate school in music and have to sell burgers or something to pay the bills so that I could, live in New York, which is the only place in the country where you can freelance in music. And well, it just turned out that I actually passed my classes. I mean, I didn't even understand the names of my classes when I started graduate school. So it was pretty funny. I just oh, crap, I can't let this scam go to waste. And eventually they still haven't figured out that I don't know anything.
There you go. So I've seen a lot of, there's a lot of movies that, about the starving artist who's the hero. And they're always a singer, they're a dancer, they're a fine, a painter or something like that. I've never seen somebody like a tuba player.
Well, that's because we're starving.
Yeah.
And again, it's not. It doesn't get the publicity of everything else, but you certainly don't want to have an orchestra without us.
Yeah, I was gonna ask because
drive from the bottom. You always drive from the bottom.
Yeah.
Rock band.
What attracted you to to the tuba itself?
I was the only one who could carry it in fourth grade, so they gave it to me.
You're a big kid.
It just kind of worked. Yeah, I'm not little. I'm a big guy, so that was big then too. Genetics works that way. And I don't know. It just turned out that I was natural for it. I had small teeth and a big mouth, and it all kind of helps.
Yeah. And when I was in middle school, I was in jazz band for a little while, and I think when it came to bass, there some of the music that I guess we were doing didn't have actual bass parts, so they ended up the bass basically took the tuba's notes and just went along with that.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. Any war stories on the tuba? Any did you ever do marching band stuff, or was it always orchestral?
Yeah, I've never walked and played at the same time. If I don't get a chair, I'm not going to go. I'm not starving anymore. So, and that's actually kind of why I decided to take my grad school seriously. I saw these guys who were like 50 years old playing, trombone section or other things in orchestras, because I was doing some good stuff in town. I was playing like city opera and ballet and stuff. And these guys just looked like they hated being there, and they had to do all these gigs they hated because there's no job security, and they had to do like Chinese funerals for small amounts of money and marching around. And I was like, I never want to get to the point where I hate playing or where I wished I hadn't taken it up. And so for me, the joy is still there because I don't have to do the things that aren't fun. So I can pick and choose what I want to do, and that's kind of a luxury I have from having a real job also.
Yeah, you said Chinese funerals. I've never been to a Chinese funeral. Is that a thing?
It's a big gig for brass players. For some reason, they like brass music, and people play those. And there's a lot of Chinese people, so there's a lot of funerals.
There are a lot, yeah. And I guess if you go back far enough, I mean, there's I guess mass graves too, which the horns never stop playing in Mao's China. I was thinking about like horns as as an instrument, and like if you listen to like pop music in the 80s, at some point, especially if it's like a love song, there's gonna be like a saxophone solo,
Sure.
And then in the 90s, there's when like the resurgence of like ska music came back, where it was like 90s and 2000s, and then it seems like kind of the music just shifted where there were I wasn't hearing as many horns, and it's like what do those musicians do? I mean, how do you where do you go if like you're in high demand and then boom, now nobody wants to listen to you?
Well, electronics kind of did that to a lot of acoustic musicians, because there's so many things that can be approximated cheaply on a computer now, and the technology is getting better and better, and so it is trouble. It is difficult for people trying to do real live music, but there's a difference between something that's artificial and something that's live, and you're in the moment. It's like comedy. You want to be there live. You don't want to watch a video. Not that you should still buy Lou's videos, but but I mean, there's something about the atmosphere of live arts in general that you can't recreate like that. So there's always a market, but it's usually for blue-haired old ladies, unfortunately, nowadays.
Yeah, my wife is a trained dancer, so she went to University of the Arts, where she got a degree in dance, and then afterwards she danced professionally for some companies and is choreographed and stuff. And she got me into like seeing live dance, and it's one of those art forms where when it's great, I mean, it's just completely blows you away, especially if you're there seeing it live with an orchestra and all that. But what I found is that I look around at those shows, and I mean, there were so many empty seats. It was just so many people who, would rather be, spending their time elsewhere. And
we haven't done a good job marketing it, and it's a problem I think artists have in general, is that they feel like, well, what we do is art and society should support it, and we shouldn't have to go sell it because it's classical art and all that. And I'm like, well, no, it doesn't work that way. You have to go and market it. You have to put it out there, because I work at Columbia University as a professor, and there's some of the most educated people in the world. And yet I've offered people tickets to live concerts, and they're like, why would I want to see it live when I can get a CD that's perfect? And there's mistakes when you see it live. Wow. And they just don't get it because they're not exposed to it. Yet I've never seen anybody who we'd invite to a concert, even tuba concerts, and not like it. And the problem is they don't know they like it because we haven't put it out there in the mainstream. And it's not that hard to do. It's just that there's this sense of kind of, I don't know, artists have the kind of sense that we're entitled to do this. It's important that people should respect it and pay for it without, convincing them.
Yeah. Was there a point where that shift happened? Because I remember, if anyone goes like on YouTube, they should definitely check out like old episodes of the Dick Cavett show, because it's almost like it's a real just like an incredible moment in history where there's like one episode in particular, I think with Dick Cavett, where Satchel Paige, the former Negro League pitcher, legendary pitcher, is on the same show as Salvador Dalí.
Yeah.
And just taking like Dalí, just as like a very famous artist who was going on talk shows. He was going on even game shows as a way to promote his work. Now he was, a super promoter as far as what he was doing, but it's like, yeah, exactly. But there's a reason why we know who Dalí is, and so many other artists are, we have no clue who they are.
That's right. And it's like, they don't teach you that in music school. They teach you to play, they teach you all this stuff, but they don't teach you the practicalities. It's the same thing. Like, I did my PhD in genetics, and they teach you really well how to do science, and you learn how to think, but you don't learn how to be a business manager. And you realize that your job is to spend the rest of your life begging for money from the government for grants and stuff, and then managing teams, and no one has the skill. So it's like our education system trains us as if what we're doing is important and how to do it well. And then you can't necessarily function in the real planet. Yeah.
Being able to ask for money is a really, it's a skill for sure. It's something that I wish I was better at, because I think if I was better at it, I think there'd be more people willing to get. I think there are people out there that would give me money. I just got to find a way to ask for it.
Well, as libertarians, we're not good at that, because that goes contrary to our whole kind of way of thinking, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'll take care of me, you take care of you, right?
Yeah. Well, it's so funny with the as libertarians, people would think like, oh, the Libertarian Party must be just full of just billionaires and millionaires and all that. But no, I think we're probably the poorest, the poorest party. I bet that there's like the DSA or like the Democratic Socialists of America have way more money in their bank than the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, you have to be rich to want to be a socialist.
Yeah,
right. Because you didn't have to struggle. It's like it's also part of the problem I find. Like in academic circles, is like everybody kind of doesn't really understand, because most of them grew up upper middle class, had a easy life, and didn't have to work, so they don't really get work. I grew up poor, in the countryside, and I worked. I had to kill a bunch of raccoons to buy my tuba, because the only way a little kid could make money, in the countryside. So I sold raccoon furs as a kid to buy that, my horn over there.
No way. Where'd you grow up? Where's raccoon?
Upstate New York.
Upstate New York, raccoon country.
It used to be.
I remember, Steven Tyler from Aerosmith. I think he grew up in upstate New York, and I remember him telling a story. I don't know if he was on like the Howard Stern show, but he had like a very country upbringing too. Like always carried a pocket knife, and that's what. How many raccoons did it take to buy that tuba?
Quite a lot. It used to be like $40 a raccoon, and a tuba back in it's like 1980 was like $4,000. So
wow.
It's like 100 raccoons died, so I could play tuba and use it to go.
Tell you what, the sounds of a tuba must irritate raccoons like you wouldn't believe.
Well,
they must be like, we have so much bloodshed on that. So with a tuba, so that's the same tuba that you had back in the.
That's the one I bought when I was a kid. Yeah, it's my voice. I have others, but it's my voice. It's the one I grew up with, and it's how I talk to the world.
Yeah, and wow, man, $4,000. And do you have to get it like worked on, like upkeep it like with a mechanic and stuff?
Yeah, no, there's tuba experts. Yeah, there's specialists that do basically tubas, and I go to them, and they can fix it when I need it, and overhaul it every now and then, clean it out with chemicals to get all the crap out. Kill the code.
Yeah. You're just it's a walking or sitting petri dish.
Exactly, but it's at least only my germs, so it's just recycled.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's wild.
Good, right?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, like, if you didn't get it cleaned out, I mean, you could have like the same germs you had when you were a kid, just living in there,
Yeah, but it might change the sound if you get too much of them in there.
Yeah.
Change the size.
Yeah. Oh man, that's wild. The So you were a music major, and then you decided, out of everything that you can get into in grad school, you decided to go into genetics. What was that? What was that reasoning like? How'd you do that?
Kind of random. I heard that there was this like field in mathematical genetics where there were basically not very many students. So I applied in a bunch of different fields. I was interested in Asian languages, so I applied for Asian studies in some schools. I applied to do a PhD in music theory at Manhattan School of Music. I applied for genetics, and I was also interested in foreign policy and things. So I applied for a bunch of random shit, and they accepted me at Columbia. I remember coming in for my interview, and my future advisor was telling me what he did. And I was like, wow, that sounds fascinating. In my head, I'm like, I have no idea what that means at all. And somehow I got accepted because no one had ever applied to study with him before, and he wanted a student. So I got lucky, and I guess he got lucky too, because it worked out well, and we both did it. And, I got a career out of it. That's academics is a pretty good day job.
Yeah. Did you, when you went in for the interview, were you just dressed in like raccoon pelt?
I should have been, but I even showed up late because it was Columbia University, but I didn't realize that there was also a Columbia University that's in Washington Heights, which is where the medical school is. And so I got off at the wrong stop, and I was looking around for this building. They're like, you got to get back on the subway. So I did everything wrong. And most of the other interviews I had were like with people that had no idea about math. So he was the only guy that did math. And so they're just like, I don't know anything about that. So you play tuba. What's up? And we just talked about playing tuba.
Oh, wow.
So I just got lucky, and I took advantage of the opportunity. I follow the Yogi Berra philosophy. When you come to the fork in the road, take it. I went both ways, kept up the music and did, science to pay for it.
Yeah. What is mathematical genetics?
It's statistics, basically, to look at variation between populations and using statistical methods to try to find genes that, make some people more similar to each other and others more different, like for diseases and things like that. But you have to do a lot of stuff where you really try. Like New York City, you can't really do much of that because we're too mixed. We have too much diversity. So I go to places in the world that are more isolated, where there's not so much genetic variation, and try to, do studies there. And it's mostly like, because you can't do experiments on humans, so you look for where they've happened naturally and then try to use that to try to learn something, It's like I have a big study in Venezuela with an indigenous community where it's one family of like 5,000 people. And if they make it to 40, there's a lot of violence and everything early on. But if they make it past 40, they live to be 100. Their brains look perfect. We did MRIs on brains. We studied all their blood pressure and all these other chronic diseases. And they're basically way healthier than rich people, which is almost always the case in the world. It's like the poorer people, they actually walk. And they don't drive their car everywhere. Like we're starting a study now in like the Mexican border, looking at Mexican Americans and Mexicans on the two sides of the border down in Texas. And of course, the Mexicans in Mexico are way healthier because they don't get in their car to go to get the mail out of the mailbox at the end of the driveway, And so there's a huge difference. So it's always looking at things like this, where there's these experiments that exist, and then try to learn something from it.
Yeah. So, and is the takeaway basically like lifestyle, or is there something that's just embedded like in their genetics that's
It's both. In Venezuela, one of the weird observations is that this community that's pretty healthy, they live on platforms over the water because there's snakes on the land that would eat them if they didn't go over the water. That's why they lived there originally. And so these people are all like, they basically go to the bathroom through a hole in the floor, and then they swim in the water. So they're constantly reinfected with like various parasites.
Oh, shit.
And it turns out that actually, literally, that actually is probably what's making them healthy in a way, because our immune system's always evolved with parasites and all these germs, and we've only started killing them like 150 years ago. And so all of a sudden you have this huge immune system that's like an army. And then you get rid of the enemy, and then you get revolutions, which are like autoimmune diseases, which have been rising in frequency, and inflammation-related things. Like I work a lot in Finland, which is also a very weird sort of inbred population, and they're almost too clean, so they go to dirty Southern Europe, meaning Germany, and they all get diarrhea, because they're too clean. They're not exposed to anything. So.
Wow. Well,
So it's like, the things we think are good are not necessarily good. So we don't really know what we're doing, but we're all trying to figure it out.
yeah. What's the tribe called in Venezuela?
I don't know. It's a mixed community, but they're somewhat indigenous. It's in Maracaibo, within Maracaibo, and it's this it's a small community called Santa Rosa del Agua, where the people still live in the traditional way on platforms over the water. Which, by the way, is why it's called Venezuela, because when Vespucci discovered Venezuela, he saw these people living over the water, and he said, "Oh, it's like Little Venice."
Oh, wow.
So Venezuela.
Yeah. And did you do that study fairly recently? Because I mean, they've been going through quite a lot of turmoil. Like
It started 30 years ago, and we're still keeping it up. So we're trying to. It's U.S. government funded, and it's also, I think it's been a good thing to try to keep some of the doctors and stuff working in Venezuela to help prevent brain drain to some extent, and we can also see sort of the effects of what's happening in society, where the society's collapsed and other things, and there's all these other problems. And so it's pretty interesting. I mean, the most interesting finding we had was actually when Zika virus went through, that we found, because we were doing eye imaging to look at retina of these people in the population, we were working with the eye clinic, and they discovered that the people with Zika had this inflammation in the eye that was causing blindness, but it could be prevented if you caught it in time. And that was the first time that it had been observed. So we were able to start screening for that when people had eye-related problems after Zika. So there's a lot of interesting things you learn sort of by chance when you set up these experiments in interesting parts of the world. And I mostly work in all the countries in the world that America doesn't have good relations with, partly because that's where the genes are more isolated, usually because people are isolated for combinations of geography, politics, and culture. And so that's where you get kind of what's interesting for our purposes. But also, as a libertarian, I find it fascinating to go and spend time in countries that are as different as they could be from what I think should be ideal.
Right.
Because it's sort of like, as in math, you always say, well, what if I'm wrong? How does the society work, and what do they get right? And it made me more nuanced about a lot of the things I used to think, that everybody wants what we're selling, that freedom is obviously the right way. And then you start to see that, well, there's kind of two drives I think people have. One is to be free, and the other is to be taken care of. And so there's a balance between those two in every society, because the more people take care of you, the less free you are, right? Because you have to follow rules and everything. And I start wondering, I used to think everybody was like me, who wanted to get out of their parents' house at 18, be independent, and be on their own, even though I love my parents. But I'm starting to think maybe there's more and more people who do want to live in mom's basement until they're 50, and not just the people at the Libertarian Party. Many people are like that, of course, but ironically.
Yeah. I think that over the past few years, like that, I guess one of the biggest insights that, obviously I'm not the only one to discover this, is that, we all don't value the same stuff. Like and the idea, like when, the idea, like it's a noble cause. I want to bring democracy to the world and blah, blah. It's like, well, it's really tough. Yeah. It's really tough if they don't want it,
Yeah. And if they want it and they don't vote for the guy we want, we just organize a coup.
Yeah. Which is just that's the backdoor, way of
democracy's great as long as you vote for our guy.
Yeah.
And that's what both of our main political parties seem to think as well.
Mm-hmm.
We love democracy, but if you vote for the other guy, democracy will die.
Right. Oh yeah, no, exactly. And now it's, with the presidential election coming up, democracy means two choices. Yeah. So it's only it's only Joe Biden or Donald Trump. That's it. Anything more than that is not,
And that's not even democracy, because if you vote for Trump, the Democrats say that's the end of democracy.
Right.
So I'm like, okay.
Well,
God forbid the people vote and get what they want, because that can't work with democracy.
Well, I like to on Twitter in particular, I like to put democracy up to a vote. Who's for democracy and who's against it. And it might just be the followers that I have, but they are very much against democracy. So if we did hold democracy up to a vote, democracy would lose handedly.
But who's democracy?
Right. And then, well, there's always the guy who's like, well, it's a constitutional republic, actually. And it's like, hey, okay.
Yeah, that's working real well, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Constitution seems to be getting weaker or bigger and bigger, actually more controlling of us as they keep changing how they interpret it.
I wanted to go back to something you said about the Finns. Like every time they go to Europe, Germany, getting diarrhea. Over the I'm not talking about this isn't a diarrhea story, everybody. So for those of you who tuned in to hear diarrhea stories, I'm not going to give you one like that.
But Montezuma lives in Germany.
What's that?
Montezuma is from Germany. If you're a Finn,
Right. There we go. He only vacations in Mexico.
Exactly.
So like I think for probably at least 6 months, say I've been eating clean, like been staying away from preservatives and, just using like salt and pepper and garlic and, just, keeping away from that. And one of the good things about eating clean and like, watching your calorie intake is that, you lose weight and you feel better.
Yeah.
But the downside is it really, anytime that I go to like a new restaurant, it's like, oh, this is going to mess with my stomach. And I'm somebody who I've never had stomach issues before. I used to be able to, eat anything, but now I've, because I'm seeking, I guess, a healthier body, and I want to, because live longer. It's fucking me up, and it's limiting what I can do as far as like, adventures and just dining,
But I think we have so many theories about what's good for us and bad for us when it comes to diet and everything else. And I'm not sure it really, I would say if it feels good, do it in a way when it comes to food, because if your body feels better, it doesn't feel better. And what you can handle, what you can't handle. And it's different for different people. I mean, I always am reminded of like, I have a study of Inuits, in Greenland and Canada and over there. And one of the interesting things is, they used to only eat fat, basically. They didn't eat anything else because there aren't a lot of vegetables that grow in Greenland, right? It's just a rock. You can't grow corn. But they didn't have a lot of heart disease and a lot of lipid problems, anything, even though they're getting all those vitamins from eating raw whale fat. And then Denmark had said, well, geez, we got to give you fruits and vegetables, and diabetes went up. Because they weren't processing it. They're sort of were adapted for a certain lifestyle, and they changed it and doing what was supposed to be healthy, and it wasn't necessarily. Another good example is in China. Like one of the projects I had that was one of the more successful ones is we found the gene for lactose intolerance, and I have the patent on it, which was kind of good. It paid for my apartment in Finland. And it was actually done with someone who's from Libya, who's now there. So we're trying to work and try to help Libya get out of their brain drain after the war and all. But what I was going to say is that China decided in around the year 2000 that they needed to drink more milk because milk is good for you, right? It prevents osteoporosis and all this stuff based on a bunch of studies of white people. Well, everyone in East Asia is not able to digest lactose. So they're all being pushed to drink more milk based on studies of white people because no Chinese senior citizen had drank milk their whole lives because they never drank milk before. It's not part of their culture. So what happened is everyone got lactose intolerance. Everyone's feeling bad. And I had friends there and they'd say like, yeah, the government tells me to drink more milk. So I drink more milk, but I always feel kind of bloated and uncomfortable and I don't like the taste. I'm like, well, then don't drink it.
Yeah.
Because they set policies without actually having the science behind them, which is not an unusual thing we all know now, right?
Yeah.
So my point is when it comes to doing what you think is clean or better, if it makes you feel good, great. And if it doesn't, maybe try something else.
Yeah. I just, I think like for me, a good marker is whether or not I feel bloated after eating, so like my wife, for the past like 4 months or so, we took a sourdough bread making class together.
Okay.
And I used some like evil plan where we both took the class. She's the only one who makes the bread, which is, which is great. So I don't, and it's fantastic. And like, I could eat a ton of this bread and not feel any bloating whatsoever. But if I eat, outside of the house, with, whatever hamburger buns they use like that, then I feel bloated. It's like, obviously, something is going, something's going on there. And one thing when I was in Iceland, for my honeymoon some years back, I had the best lamb of my life. I've never had better lamb than I did when I was in Iceland. And then the past couple of times I've tried to eat lamb, I think it was from New Zealand, completely fucked me up. And I'm like, and I don't think we import any lamb from Iceland, or if we did, it would just be super expensive.
Yeah, and I mean, even they import lamb because there's not that many sheep in Iceland. But some of it's from Iceland, of course. I think it's also the way they cook it, that and everything else about it, Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that we try to oversimplify to convince ourselves we're doing something good. And my attitude is, if it works, do it. If it doesn't work, try something else. I mean, a lot of traditional medicine was based on experimentation. People tried stuff over and over again, and they realized this worked and this didn't work, and they stopped doing the thing that didn't work.
Yeah.
That's why we tend not to eat carnivorous mammals. Most of the mammals we eat are herbivores, and it's because the liver can be toxic for carnivores. And so that's why people stopped doing it. They tried, and they said, yeah, don't eat that one.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. With diet, so there's diet, and there's also something I see a lot of. I guess what's like the happiness index, where it's like, who are the happiest countries on the planet? And I see this stuff, and every time I see it, I'm like, give me a break. Like, what is that? Yeah, what's your take on that?
That stuff to me is hilarious, because if you just ask people if they're happy, it's inversely related to GNP. So like poor countries, people are happier because they have the things that actually make people happy, which is your family, your friends, your community. It's not stuff, right? Stuff doesn't make you happy, but the social scientists didn't like these results. They said, well, that doesn't fit with our models. That can't be happy because their people are suffering and their life is difficult. So they redefined happiness as access to healthcare, access to education, access to this and that and the other thing. And basically they defined happiness as the Scandinavian model. And of course, therefore, the Scandinavian countries come out the happiest. But like in Finland, everyone laughs at this because I've never met a Finn that thinks they're happy. They're almost proud of being depressed. They have one of the highest suicide rates in the world. They have what they call seasonal depression, or kalmos, which is every winter, everybody's depressed. And actually, the suicide rate goes up when it gets nice out in spring, because if you're still depressed, it must be me. But it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of silly because, I spent a lot of time, for example, I lived in North Korea for a while and I worked there. And I don't think they're less happy than South Korea, which has the highest suicide rate in all the OECD countries, where, it's off the charts, and people are struggling so hard in life that they call their country, Hell Korea, because the pressure is too high. In North Korea, there's no pressure because nobody works very hard. Because if you work hard, you might get noticed and you get slapped down. And getting slapped down is something you don't want to get in North Korea.
Yeah. How did you come to work in? And I definitely want to talk about North Korea. But first, how did you come about working in Finland?
When I was a grad student, someone from Finland was great for studying rare diseases because it's a very small population. Their language is unrelated to their neighbors. So they've been genetically isolated for a thousand years, since however many years it is since the Ice Age, a really long time. And so they have a lot of diseases that are very different from what their neighbors do. They don't have the common genetic diseases found in most white people. They have completely different ones because in the small number of Finns that started the population, by chance, those were higher frequency. So there were a lot of rare disease genes that were really easy to find in Finland because they're all kind of related and they're different from everybody else. So I got sent there to do some analyses, and I loved it. It's like, I thought, wow, Finland's great. I was there in October. It was already snowing, and I'm like, wow, this is interesting. And at one point I was walking home, and there's this giant parking lot, which was the old bus station. And I saw what looked like someone getting mugged. So in the middle of this thing, so I walked over to try to help during a blizzard. And it turned out it was two people having sex on a bench. And I'm like, oh, I like this place already.
I mean, you could still help out. You can be like, hey.
Well, I was like, do you need help? And then I realized, oh, wait, no, I'm kind of inviting myself in. That's not what I meant. I didn't have a tuba, so it didn't work. If I had the tuba with me, it would have been all over.
Oh, just serenading them. Yeah. Do you find, so, I mean, you speak, quite a few languages. Is that Is there a genetic component to that? Like, are your people from, I don't know, all corners of the world?
Well, I guess they are. I mean, I'm a geneticist, and I think genetics is mostly bullshit because most of the promises they make are bullshit. So at one point, I sent my own DNA to every genetics company to find out what they would say because I expected garbage about their prediction of my traits. I was surprised that it was complete garbage about everything. That every company had different ancestries for me and from all over the place. And it turns out I'm too mixed for it to work. And I know you look at me and I'm just like your generic white guy, but that's what the generic white guy is. It's the melting pot of the first 300 years of America. Because, my surname came from upstate New York because they were Dutch. There was a Dutch guy, at least one Dutch guy in my family who didn't have a surname, and the British made him take a surname when they took over. So they've been there, at least that one guy was there for a long time. And then anyone who went through upstate New York left some DNA in one of my relatives. And this is what happens after that. This is the melting pot, really. It's the melting pot of the first 350 years. So when they did mine, it basically come out everywhere in Europe and Native Americans. And then one of them said 99% chance I had a Han Chinese and a Punjabi relative within like 5 generations, which I doubt because I don't think there were many of them in upstate New York. But you never know. And the thing is that basically this is what America turns into eventually. So that's the problem of the melting pot. You come out like this. It'll be different in the next 400 years, but
Well, so two things. One, I love the idea of everybody in like lower New York saying like, look, if you want a good time, you got to travel north, and you got to meet this Terwilliger gal or gals.
Yep.
Like so the Dutch guy had to take a surname. So was that a thing that the Dutch just had first names?
They had patronymics, like they have now in Iceland, for example. You said you've been in Iceland. So it was somebody's so-and-so's son would be the surname.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And that still is in Iceland.
Like Van Dyke, I guess.
Well, that's a surname, but I mean, if it was somebody's son, like Evertson or Janssen or something.
Oh, okay.
And that just meant you're the son of that guy.
Got it, yeah.
And that's all they had back then.
Wow.
Like a lot of cultures, the Russians have something like that. The Icelanders still do that to this day. I remember going to Iceland. I was looking for my teacher, and they said, "What's his name?" And I gave his surname. He goes, "Well, we don't know anybody's last name. What's his first name?" I don't know. He was my teacher.
Yeah.
So I think like in terms of languages, I just think the more you learn, the easier it gets. And being a musician helps because my first foreign language was Chinese when I was in music school, and half the students were from somewhere Chinese speaking. And I had a roommate who kept talking about me behind my back in front of my face in Chinese. And I'd hear my name and they'd all laugh and something in Chinese. So I decided to break the secret code. So I studied Chinese for 3 years without telling anybody. And then one day they said something a little bit off, and I responded with like 5 minutes in Chinese, just talking at them. And then everybody's jaws dropped and they were suddenly super nice about everything. Thinking I had understood everything they'd said for the last several years. It was hilarious.
Yeah, Joe, I'm never going to cross you because you will spend at least 3 years learning the best way to get me back.
But I always smile. I'm never vindictive. I always do it with a smile and never vindictive.
Nice. Well, I'm glad you enjoy your vengeance. That's a nice way to go. So I often wonder if I've always wanted to ask like drummers in particular, like say like prog rock drummers. Like there's the drummer of the band Tool, which I really like, is Danny Carey. And he drums in a lot of odd time signatures. And I always wonder if, like, because there's that and like math rock and stuff. And I wonder if that sort of impacts the way that you view the world. Like if you, I mean, this is probably this is where I come like a question for you. Just like as as doing like mathematics and playing an instrument, if that impacts, or is it just part of the way that you see the world, like patterns and recognizing stuff?
I mean, sure. I mean, math and music are both about patterns, of course, and language is about patterns. And the thing is, I think one thing I really like about speaking a bunch of languages that aren't related to each other is that when you learn these new languages, you have to learn to think in a different way. And there's different types of logic that are closely tied to language. So like, in English is very noun oriented, right? Nouns are what's most important. But if you go to Asian languages, it's verbs that are most important, and they focus on the action. The verb comes at the end of the sentence, and some sentences don't even have subjects. And, it makes you think about everything in a different way to construct your thoughts. And you realize you can't think in English and speak in Korean, for example. You have to think in Korean. But when you think in Korean, it opens you up to new ideas and new ways of viewing the world and sort of things. And that's why I think it's really important, especially as a scientist who works with other cultures and other populations, to really understand people. You need to understand their language and the way that their brain works in a way, which you get from that. And so I think it's patterns, but they're very different patterns in different cultures. And a lot of them make sense. It's like in Korean, it's considered normal to ask somebody when you meet them, how old are you? How much money do you make? What's your job? And are you married? And, in the States, you're kind of, but they have to know that stuff to know how to talk to you.
Oh, really?
Talk differently based on age and income and job title and position and all those things. So the vocabulary is different, and you kind of have to know where you fit to speak to people. In South Korea, in North Korea, it's easy because everybody's kind of the same.
Wow. I wonder if like that gives just opportunities for South Koreans to just be good liars. It's like how much do you make? Was it before taxes or after?
Right. It is true that like Japanese and Korean especially, you can say sentences and they're very vague sometimes because there's no subject explicitly stated. So it could mean I this, it could mean you do this, it could mean so there's a lot of ambiguity built in, which I think is kind of like the way of avoiding lying in a way of avoiding committing to something because, well, that's not what I said. I meant them because it was explicit in the language.
Yeah.
It's an interesting nuance that's important, and I think causes a lot of problems in international relations.
Mm-hmm.
People don't really speak the same language, even though they have translators, because the logic is built into the language.
Right. And with that, I definitely wanted to talk to you about North Korea and just to like bring everyone up to speed. I found out a lot of this stuff about Joe like 5 minutes after my set. So I did my set. He goofed on, he goofed on my tuba bit, and then we started talking. He's like, yeah, and I went. I'm at Columbia. He said, by the way, Lou, you're 23andMe, because I do a bit about that. He's like, it's all bullshit. And I'm like, no, I can't believe that it's bullshit. He's like, yeah, they're all bullshit. And, I was doing work in North Korea, and it's like all this in like 5 minutes. So I was like, one day I'm going to have to unpack all this stuff. And, so yeah, North Korea, talk about, how you got there. Was it first through doing some research on population stuff?
Yeah. So I was studying Korean in grad school for fun, and I was studying Russian because this was like in the late 80s, early 90s when shit was happening, the end of the Soviet Union, the Cold War and all that. So I was fascinated by all these places, and my university, when I was in college in music school at Peabody, the orchestra went to the Soviet Union. They were like one of the first American student orchestras to go to the Soviet Union and play. And they said, when they came, I wasn't on the trip, but when they came back, they said how, it just changed the way they saw the world and how things weren't the way we thought they were, right? And so I just became intensely curious about all these closed countries. And so I studied Russian and I studied Korean, and I went to a Korean bookstore in New York and saw a book about Koreans in Kazakhstan that was half in Korean and half in Russian. I'm like, why are the Koreans in Kazakhstan? And so I read the book and I got fascinated. I thought, wow, this is a great science idea where you take this. It's because basically Koreans moved into Russia in the late 1800s because there were famines in North Korea. And then Stalin, wonderful man that he is, our collaborator on this project, deported the entire Korean population to Kazakhstan because they looked Japanese, and it was World War II era, and they were the enemy minority of Soviet Union. And so there were all these Koreans who were suddenly put into the most distant place on Earth from the ocean. So it's like total cultural replacement, total diet replacement, lifestyle replacement, same genes. And then there's also a group of Koreans after the Korean War, because the Korean War was quite violent and there were a lot of foreigners there, that were sort of half Korean kids were born, and they started doing international adoption with those to Northern Europe, to Sweden and other places. And so then they started just taking really, because there was a lot of poverty there, they started having children who didn't have families or who were really poor, and they were adopted and raised in Sweden and America and other places. So then we thought, geez, this is a great idea. We got same genes and radically different environments, kind of like taking plants and growing them in different soil with different fertilizer to see what happens to them. Kind of way to look at nature versus nurture. So we had this project with the Korean diaspora in China, in Kazakhstan, and in Northern Europe, in Scandinavia. And so in the process, I met a lot of people from North Korea, because there was a lot of North Koreans in Kazakhstan and a lot of North Koreans in China. And they were really friendly and, hi, how are you? And really, and not this robotic thing that everybody imagines that they're like. And so as a scientist, I'm curious. I'm curious about everything, as I guess you can kind of figure out from having had a 5-minute conversation with me. So I said, well, gee, I got to learn more about this place. So I started reading books and everything. And I went to China and took a course on North Korean language for summer one year when we were working with the Koreans there. And I went there a few times. And then I found an opportunity to go there and teach. And there's a university in North Korea run by Americans. And it was mostly volunteers, people that were retired. A lot of them were Korean Americans who were old, who were born in the North and wanted to go back and help out. But basically, it's called the Pyongyang University of Science and Technology, and they teach agriculture, capitalist business, and computer science. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go. And they offered me a chance to go and teach about human evolution and genetics. And I thought this is a great opportunity to go there, to live there, to get to meet people and to learn and be like Captain Kirk and explore unknown civilizations without interfering and just try to learn how it goes. And so that was a great experience, actually, to live there and really see how it goes and how these people are like innocent, like children, and they're so friendly. And part of that, I think, is because they have no stress and none of the responsibilities that we have in the West, because the opposite of a libertarian society in a way, where the government's like, here's your house, here's your kids, here's your wife, here's your kids, here's your family. This is what you do, and you don't have to make any decisions. And so that means life's easy and nothing's your fault. It's always, you can, well, it's just the way it is. And it's interesting to see that they don't seem miserable because of that. They don't have a lot of stuff, but everybody's got the same amount of not much stuff, And it was surprising to me, but I'm just sitting there trying to learn about it and interact with them. I had a friend actually who's Korean from Uzbekistan who lives in Moscow, and she was active in Soviet Young Communist League when she was young. And now she told me, she's a psychiatrist in Moscow, and she told me, she said, in Soviet times, we were happy because we didn't know we were poor. And now, but everybody got along with each other and they all kind of worked together. And now, she said, we have a lot more stuff, lots better quality of life, much more, openness in the society. And yet the quality of people went down because they didn't care about each other anymore, because it was all about themselves. And they saw people that had 1,000 times more money, so people were less happy. And I think there's something to that in a twisted way. And I say that even as a libertarian who doesn't think that's how I would run a society ever. But it's for sure true that the stress is lower, that there's no responsibility. And so people are very friendly and innocent. And it's also interesting in North Korea, for example, that, we hear stories about how in the Stasi in East Germany, everybody's reporting on each other and, no one trusted anyone. In North Korea, it seems to be different. Like, people are in groups and they protect each other within the group. So like if a student cheated on an exam, everybody else would take the blame because they didn't want anyone to get in trouble. So they're sort of like protecting each other from the system, preventing anyone from sticking up and getting slapped down. And so it's an interesting thing. And it builds this sense of community, which is the part communism, the root of communism as well. So the one thing they kind of got right that we're missing in the West is that I don't even know the person who lives next door to me. I don't know his name. I recognize him maybe if I saw him, but that's New York life. They're in these social groups like humans always were throughout history, and kind of tribes where we knew everyone, we knew where we fit. And it was it's an interesting thing to observe. So for me, it's been fascinating, and I've learned a lot from that experience.
With teaching in a like an American or quasi-American university there, and you said one of the classes about like capitalist business.
Yeah.
Like, what is teaching like, under that regime? I mean, are there people saying like, you could only teach this book or that book, or do you have to watch what you say?
Yeah, I mean, the reason they want Americans there, first of all, is to teach English. They want them to speak English. They want them to learn about the world. They're mostly kids who are pretty well connected or there, of course, that they trust. But there's also some kids from the countryside who are really, really, really smart, And, I think you do have to submit your PowerPoints and things to people for approval. But I didn't really have to do that because I had other experiences in North Korea where I took Dennis Rodman there several times. Mm-hmm. And so I know the leader. We stayed at his house for a week. And so they know that I know him, and therefore they don't censor mine. So I have a little bit more freedom, and I could teach critical thinking. Like I teach philosophy of science a little bit. Like science is about showing things to be wrong, not showing things to be right. We try to disprove the ideas that we have. And so I can do all of that, and they actually like it, and they trust me because I'm also not trying to abuse it,
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting situation. Now, what I really find interesting is like we eat all our meals with the students, we live with the students, we're with them all the time, and you'll sit at dinner and you ask them, say, so what do you want to do when you graduate school? And they say, I want to be a CEO. It's the number one answer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happening now because like ever since when Kim Jong Un took over, they kind of changed some of the policies so that there's now this system of startup companies where if you have an idea, you can go to a ministry and get some money to do a startup company. And if you do well, you pay back money to the ministry and you can keep the rest and pay your people because they're trying to promote, innovation and entrepreneurship because they realize they kind of have to survive, in the world, especially with all the sanctions against them. So it's actually changed a lot in the last, I haven't been there since 2017 because our authoritarian government won't let me go.
Mm-hmm.
Trump banned travel by Americans. So,
and I'm sure, with their tight relationship with China and the way that China has liberalized their markets, like they're probably looking at them like, we should probably make some changes.
They don't have a tight relationship with China. They hate China more than they hate anybody.
Oh, wow.
Because China can open and close the gates on the sanctions and make them jump. And Koreans are very proud, North or South, and they don't like being told what to do. And China has a history of telling them what to do, and they have to do it. And so they really don't like China. Russia, they're okay with because Russia's foreign. It's not so close. And they don't really care that much to make them jump. But yeah, it's a big mistake our government makes. They say, well, we've got to pressure China to do something. They don't know what the hell to do to change any of the policies of North Korea because North Korea certainly isn't going to listen to them unless they, threaten to strangle them. But China doesn't want to threaten to strangle them because they don't want us on their border either.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a mistake to think that China is actually connected well to North Korea and has ability to influence them. It just doesn't pass the smell test based on everything I've seen there.
Yeah. I remember, at the time when, Dennis Rodman was going over to North Korea, and I didn't know you at the time. I didn't know you were the man who was setting that up. But there was so much, there were so many jokes being, there were so many jokes about on late night and all over, like, oh, Dennis Rodman, talking to these, to these people. And whenever I think about North Korea, I think of my friend Michael Malice. Do you know Michael? He
is, but I don't know him. Yeah.
Yes, he wrote a book about North Korea. He's been in North Korea before. He has
book. Yeah.
He's very fond of the North Korean people, and he's very much of when talking about like the Korean War, it's he talks about how ultimately the people suffered incredibly for this, and he wants the best for the North Korean people, and sort of look at it, I was like, if Dennis Rodman is able to bring something to the table, like great, then so be it. So how did you make that happen? Like,
Yeah.
How do you meet the ruler of North Korea, and then also one of the greatest rebounders in NBA history?
It's a funny story. I was teaching in North Korea when Dennis went the first time with Vice, and the students all said to me the next day, said, "Wow, we stayed up all night and we saw this strange-looking American guy saying nice things about our country and about our leader, and it makes us question our stereotypes about Americans." And I'm like, that's the whole point. That's the point of everything I do when I go abroad to these countries where we don't get along. Is I don't want to change them. I want to change how they see us, because they see us as the enemy trying to kill them, because we did a pretty good job of it in the Korean War. Mm-hmm. And we've had nuclear weapons aimed at them for, since the Eisenhower administration. I mean, the Korean War peace treaty said no nukes in Korea. And then Eisenhower said, yeah, we're going to skip that part. And we put them in South Korea, and they were only removed in the 80s. And, this is like, no wonder they don't trust us. We all understand why we don't trust them. But you get this impasse where nobody trusts anybody. And the thing is that, when Dennis did that, I thought, wow, this is wonderful, right? So I get home to New York and I'm online and I see a chance there's a charity auction to play horse with Dennis Rodman. And that game was actually 11 years ago today. I won the auction, and 11 years ago today, I met Dennis at Basketball City downtown, and I won. It cost me $2,500 to shoot hoops with Dennis for an hour. And basically, we just talked with him and his agents about North Korea, and he said, "Yeah, I want to go back, but travel agent won't sell me a ticket. I don't want to go back there." And so I said, "No problem. I can help. I can help." And so, I told all my friends, I'm going to spend $2,500. I'm going to get Dennis to take me to Kim Jong Un's mansion, and everyone laughed at me. But there's no more powerful sentence in the English language than I can't. So I didn't say that. I said, I'm going to do it. I invested, and sure enough, it worked out. And he wanted to go back. I was going to spend the summer over there, and I made some calls, and, we ended up going back in September of that year and for vacation at Kim's house.
Wow.
And that's how I got to meet him. I was kind of translating for Dennis. Now, it's not that they don't speak English. They have great English translators, but they don't speak Rodman. Because Rodman, yo, tell that guy that thing, do that thing. And I have to know what that means. His toast at dinner was, your father, your grandfather did a lot of fucked up shit, but you tried to change that. That's why I love you. And I'm
wow.
How the hell do I translate that one?
Yeah.
The translator goes, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. I'm like, yeah, you did. So I said, I translated it as, during the time of the dear leader and the time of the great leader, relations with America were bad, but you're trying to change all that. So that's diplomacy.
Yeah. Thank you for, stopping another war from happening.
Or from Dennis getting in trouble. Now, but Dennis is cool. They like him. And you know what they said to us, we took a team of NBA players over there the next year for a game, retired NBA players. And what they said, when Kim Jong Un said to us, was, he goes, wow, Americans actually kept their word. I'm amazed. First time ever, because we promised to do it and we did it. And I think that's how you build trust. You keep your word. You just be honest. He said, you guys don't always say nice things about us, but you say the same thing to our face that you say behind our back. And that's why we trust you.
Oh, wow.
And I think that's the bottom line, because North Koreans are the kind of like country folk in America, kind of simple, sheltered a bit from the world, but they respect honesty. They respect sincerity. And if you give it, you get it. And they always give you enough rope to hang yourself with. When I'm there, I have a lot more freedom than most foreigners because of my connections. And I've never taken advantage. If I go somewhere, I always go out of my way to follow the rules. And therefore, I get even more respect and more freedom. I never try to push the limits. And so many foreigners are like, oh, I got to go, I'm going to go do something I'm not supposed to do. And I'm like, yeah, and that's why you're arrested. It's like, it's just like, it's the way to get a free ride home on Air Force One, and Bill Clinton comes to save you or something,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. With Kim Jong Un, did he study outside of North Korea? Was he like Western educated?
I think he was in Switzerland for a while, but I don't know for sure. And he said he'd been in Europe a bit. He went to an NBA game in Paris once, but he didn't speak English. So okay. The only thing he understood was one time when they were talking about something, Robin said, fuck Obama. And then he cracked up.
Yeah. What was, how were things, under Obama versus how they were under Trump versus, Biden now? I mean, was there like because under Trump, it seemed like there was, under Trump, there was a lot of, talk about, this guy, where he's going to start World War III. He's every single, thing he was doing in foreign policy was wrong and it was going to lead to, destruction. But it seemed like there was quite a few, I don't know, it seemed like relatively peaceful, I mean.
Well, he's the first president in my life that didn't preside over an attack on a new country.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, like, when we met Kim Jong Un in 2013, the first time, when we came back, the Obama administration wanted nothing to do with this. We had Kim Jong Un say, "Here, have him call me. Here's my phone number." And they told us to fuck off, basically, the government. Trump, on the other hand, called us to Trump Tower because he called Dennis to Trump Tower because they're old buddies, because Dennis was on Celebrity Apprentice and he'd known Trump for many years. And what Trump said was, "Man, this is great. Anything you do to talk to them is better than shooting at them." He goes, I'll give me the number. I'll tell Obama to call and we'll make it happen. It didn't happen. But I know Trump may not believe in a lot of things, but I really do believe he doesn't want to kill people. He wanted to avoid war. He wanted to build hotels, and do business. And I'm cool with that. I don't care what his motive is, as long as you don't want to start a war. I'm down with that. And like John Bolton, he's not exactly a great person in my opinion, but he's super smart. I read his book, and in his book, he even said that he quit as Trump's security advisor because they drew up plans to bomb Iran, and he refused to do it when he heard people would be killed, 100 people. He goes, "No, we're not doing it." He said the worst decision ever made by a president, because Bolton thought every problem could be solved with war. And of course, war usually creates more war. And we've done such a good job in the Middle East of starting wars and leaving them worse than we found them, Mm-hmm. So I think I give Trump credit for that, because I honestly believe he really doesn't believe in using the military, but he believes in having a strong one so that other countries didn't do anything.
Yeah. Well,
so like the North Koreans, I mean, the Biden administration was giving them the silent treatment. Their policy was, we don't want to talk to them. So they hated us because we went over and talked to them. Because their policy was, we're not talking to you till you do what we want. I'm like, that doesn't work with my girlfriends in the past, right? They give me the silent treatment. It just pisses me off. It doesn't make me give them what they wanted. Maybe for a moment, but no. It certainly isn't going to work in foreign policy. Now Biden's doubled down on that. It's the silent treatment. And so they don't have much use for us right now. I mean, I still meet with the diplomats in New York, the North Korean diplomats, and I have a good relationship with them, but they're not interested in talking to our government right now, because they're not, they're just, all they want to say is give up your nuclear weapons. Well, Rodman asked Kim Jong Un about nuclear weapons. What's up with the nukes? What's up with the nukes? And he said, Gaddafi gave up his nukes and you killed Gaddafi. Saddam Hussein let weapons inspectors in his country and you killed Saddam Hussein. Pakistan harbored Osama bin Laden and you didn't do shit. I'm not stupid. Of course I want nuclear weapons so you don't attack me and try to change my regime, because U.S. keeps saying they want regime change. That's logic. I said, I got no response to that. You're right.
Yeah.
So people want nuclear weapons because we threaten them, because they feel threatened and they want to survive. They don't want regime change.
Yeah, I think if I had a nuclear weapon, I think people in my community would respect me a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely.
In my suburban community, I think in New Jersey.
Absolutely. I mean, I looked at it at one point when, because we had a relationship with Trump and Kim Jong Un, and I was kind of like, gee, I know two guys who have nuclear weapons aimed at each other. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a weird situation to be in as a tuba player who used to kill raccoons.
And Joe, on that note, I think we could bring this episode to an end. A tuba player, a tuba player used to kill raccoons. He's a diplomatic whiz kid too. Joe,
that's libertarian foreign policy. We don't need no stinking government. Let's do it ourselves.
There we go. Joe, where can people find you, or if you don't want people to find you, where should they look so they don't find you?
They can find me anywhere. I'm at Columbia University. Could see, if you want to know about Korea, see our movie Big Bang in Pyongyang. That one's a good one. Mm-hmm. And if you want tuba music, It's our brass CD, Film Harmonic Brass. It's a brass group of mine. Go out there and enjoy it. And if you want a good book to read, I recommend this one.
For those of you listening, Joe just held up my book. Joke isn't funny anymore. He was very kind. I think he read it on a train coming back from Syracuse, and he told me he enjoyed it. So that was very nice of him.